The Civil War between the Union and Confederacy is arguably the most famous and bloody conflict in American history. In fact, many believe this war that took place from 1861 to 1865 is a more significant event than the American Revolution. We see this in a countless number of books, movies, and articles. We see this through commemorative monuments and cemeteries, and we see this from the preserved sites of major battles and numerous other things. Historians especially have repeatedly discussed and debated many issues about the Civil War. There is one question, however, that many historians argue over. And this historical question is, were there fundamental differences between the North and South that eventually led to the Civil War? Many historians argue that the Civil War revealed fundamental differences in American society, and that war was the only way to resolve those differences, thus making it inevitable. That by becoming such different societies, the North and South could no longer coexist in one nation, and that war was the inevitable consequence. In other words, how can a nation-state reconcile a slave-based society with a controlled aristocracy, with a society based on democratic, liberal ideas and opportunity for common folk? These historians go on to argue that defeat of the South thus marked a fundamental turning point in American history. By winning the war, the North didn't have to compromise with the South anymore. The historians that believe in these fundamental differences between the two sections, however, have contrasting perspectives on the source of these differences. Many believe that the source was slavery. James M. McPherson, American Civil War historian and professor of United States history at Princeton University, places more importance on slavery as the root cause. People in the South who disconnected from the Union believed they were protecting their rights and liberties. But those rights they wanted to keep, McPherson says, were the rights to own slaves. Believing that Lincoln would destroy their slavery, Southerners thus decided to separate from the Union. Not all agree with this idea. Other historians argue that it was not slavery, but the result of fundamental conflict between the North and South for control of the United States. Charles Beard, one of the most influential American historians of the first half of the 20th century, strongly believed that the Civil War was a fight for political authority, waged by people of two different economic systems. It was a conflict between the industrial North and agrarian South. The prize for which they contended was political domination of the nation. While some believe that there were fundamental differences between the North and South that led to the Civil War, other historians deny any interpretation that emphasizes irreconcilable differences between the two sections. They argue that America had slavery for many decades, and when tension and arguments arose between the North and South, they were resolved through compromise. Although President Abraham Lincoln made it obvious that he disapproved of slavery, he also made it clear that he would not intervene while it was existing in the South. Numerous historians believe that because of this idea of compromise, these two radically different societies could have coexisted without going to war. That war was not inevitable, and therefore could have been prevented. Believing that fundamental differences between the North and South were not the cause of the bloody conflict, but ultimately it was the array of errors and misjudgments by a blundering generation of politicians which allowed extremists to dominate, eventually leading to war. This can be shown in numerous events that occurred between 1830 to 1861, such as the Fugitive Slave Act, which was met with impassioned criticism and resistance, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which led to the Civil War in Bleeding Kansas. In my opinion, I think that there were fundamental differences between the North and South based on how I have been taught to think about it. That these fundamental differences were so great that it ultimately led to a war between the two sections. However, I can definitely see how someone would argue the opposite. This is, without a doubt, a controversial topic that has been discussed for many years in the past and will most probably continue to be debated for many years in the future.